I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood very still in the hallway outside the kitchen, my hand pressed flat against the cold wall, and I listened to my daughter-in-law tell my son exactly what she thought of me. She's been here almost 2 years, Derek. 2 years, and now she's sick on top of everything else. I can't do this, I won't. She needs to find somewhere else to go. My son said nothing for a long moment. I held my breath. She's my mother, Heather. I know that, and I'm your wife. So which one of us actually matters to you? That was the moment I stopped hoping things would work out on their own. My name is Joan. I'm 67 years old. I taught elementary school in Winnipeg for 31 years, raised one son on my own after my husband left when the boy was 9, and I never once asked anyone for more than they could give. That's not me being a martyr. That's just the truth. I was careful my whole life not to be a burden. And then, one afternoon in a kitchen I'd helped pay for, I found out it hadn't mattered at all. Let me back up. My son, I'll call him by the name I gave him, which is Nathan, married Heather 6 years ago. She's from Oakville, originally, polished and pretty and always slightly formal with me, like I was a guest at a hotel she managed. Not unkind exactly, just careful. I told myself that was normal, that some people just needed time. When my second husband Thomas, passed away in the fall 3 years ago, everything shifted. Thomas and I had built a quiet, comfortable life in a small house in St. Vital. He had a pension, I had mine, and we had a little money set aside. Not a fortune, but enough. After he died, I didn't know what to do with myself at first. The house felt enormous. I started making mistakes, leaving the stove on, forgetting appointments. My doctor said it was grief mostly, that it would pass. But Nathan had already decided what should happen. He called me one evening, and his voice was warm in a way it hadn't been in a while, and he said, "Mom, why don't you come stay with us for a bit? Just to get back on your feet." I should have thought harder about what a bit meant. I sold a few things, put some furniture in storage, rented out the St. Vital house. My name was still on the deed. Thomas had made sure of that, and moved into Nathan and Heather's place in Kanata, just west of Ottawa. The spare bedroom, the one that used to be a home office. There was still a whiteboard on one wall when I arrived, covered in someone else's project notes in dry erase marker that had been there long enough to ghost into the paint. I tried to be useful. I cooked when I could. I picked up the grandchildren, 2 girls, Mara and Lily, 5 and 8, from school on the days Heather worked late. I kept my things in my room. I didn't comment on how they ran their household, even when I wanted to. But I could feel it, the way a room changes when someone walks in who doesn't quite belong, the way conversations paused when I appeared, the way Heather would smile at me with her whole mouth but not her eyes. Then, in January, I got the diagnosis, breast cancer. Early stage, the oncologist said. Very treatable. We caught it fast. Those were his exact words. We caught it fast. He was upbeat in the way doctors are when they're trying not to terrify you. I came home from that appointment and sat in the car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. I told Nathan that evening, after dinner. Heather was in the room. I watched her face while I spoke, and I saw something move across it that I didn't fully understand at the time. Not sympathy, something more like calculation, a quiet repositioning, like someone adjusting their footing before a difficult conversation. She left the room before I'd even finished talking. Nathan hugged me and said all the right things. "We'll figure this out, Mom. You're not alone. Whatever you need." I believed him because he's my son, and I'd spent 30 years choosing to believe the best of him. The treatment started in February, radiation twice a week at the cancer center on Baseline Road. I drove myself most days. On the days I felt too tired, Nathan took me, and I could see the effort it cost him. The rescheduling, the apologizing to Heather when he got home late. It became something we didn't talk about directly. I heard the argument on a Thursday in March. I had come downstairs to get a glass of water. It was past 11. I thought they were asleep. I heard Heather's voice before I reached the bottom of the stairs, and something about the tone of it made me stop. She's been here almost 2 years, Derek. 2 years, and now she's sick on top of everything else. She called him Derek. That's not his name. But I didn't think about that then. I can't do this. I won't. She needs to find somewhere else to go. I stood in the hallway and I listened to my son say nothing. I listened to him not defend me. I listened to the long, deciding silence, and then I heard him say quietly, "I'll talk to her." I went back upstairs. I didn't get the water. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and I thought about Thomas, who would have known exactly what to do. I thought about the whiteboard on my wall, and the ghost of someone else's life underneath my own. And then I opened my laptop. I am not a dramatic person. I don't make scenes, but something in me went very still and very clear that night. The way things do when you finally stop pretending. I looked at my bank accounts. I looked at the rental income from the St. Tin Vital house which had been accumulating in a separate account Thomas had set up, his idea, not mine, and I had almost forgotten about it. 41 months of rent minus expenses, a number that surprised me. I looked at my pension, my RRSP, the small inheritance from my mother that I'd never touched, Thomas's life insurance, which I had also barely looked at since the funeral because looking at it made it too real. I added it all up. Then I called my sister. Her name is Carol. She lives in Saskatoon, and she is the most practical person I have ever known. I called her at midnight, which I never do, and she picked up on the second ring and said, "Joan, what happened?" Not a question. She already knew something had. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is unusual for Carol. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to leave," I said, "but I want to do it right." "Then do it right," she said. "Don't leave like you're running away. Leave like you planned it." I took 2 weeks. I didn't tell Nathan. I didn't change my routine. I still drove myself to radiation on Tuesdays and Fridays. I still picked up Mara and Lily on Wednesdays. I made a pot of soup on Sunday and left it in the fridge because that's what I did every Sunday, and I wasn't going to stop on account of anything Heather had said about me in her own kitchen. But in between, I was making calls. I called a real estate lawyer in Ottawa. I called my financial advisor in Winnipeg, a woman named, well, she knows who she is. I called a senior living consultant, which is a thing I didn't know existed until Carol told me about it. I was not looking for a nursing home. I was looking for an apartment, my own apartment, in a building with an elevator and a good super and a balcony if possible, because I have always wanted a balcony. I found one. A 2-bedroom in Westboro on the 3rd floor with a south-facing balcony and a walk to the river. It was more than I'd planned to spend. I signed the lease anyway. I also called my lawyer about my will. When Thomas died, we had simple wills. Everything to each other, then to Nathan. That's what it said. I had not revisited it since the funeral. I revisited it now. I'm not going to tell you everything I changed, because that's between me and my lawyer, and eventually it will be between everyone else and the document itself. But I will tell you this. I have a niece named, she's Carol's daughter, 29, sharp as anything, just finished her master's in environmental policy at Dalhousie. I have always loved her. I have always thought Nathan got more than his share of my attention, and she got less than she deserved. I thought about that while I was sitting in my lawyer's office on a grey Tuesday afternoon. I thought about a lot of things. The week before I planned to leave, Nathan knocked on my bedroom door in the evening. He sat down in the chair by the window, the one I'd brought from St. Lunt, Vital, and he looked at his hands for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." I said, "Okay." He said they'd been thinking He and Heather had been talking, and they felt that given everything, given the treatment and the stress and the space situation, it might be better for me to look at other options. He said it gently. He'd practiced it, I could tell. There were no rough edges. It was the kind of speech you give when you want to say a hard thing without actually saying it. He didn't meet my eyes the whole time. When he was done, I said, "How long do I have?" He looked up. "What? How long do you need me to be gone by?" He flushed. "Mom, it's not like that, Nathan." I kept my voice even. "It's all right. Just tell me a date." He said the end of April. 5 weeks. He said it like it was generous. I told him I'd be gone in 2. He looked relieved. That was the part that stayed with me afterward. Not the conversation, not the practiced gentleness, but that relief. Like I'd lifted something off him. I went to bed that night and I thought about the 9-year-old boy I'd walk to school every morning after his father left, the one who used to hold my hand until he was almost too old for it, and I let myself grieve that for exactly one night. Then I was done grieving. I left on a Saturday. I'd arranged movers, a small company, 2 men, very efficient. I had not actually accumulated much in that house. Mostly it was boxes of books, my chair, my mother's china, the things from storage that I'd had delivered to Westboro the day before. The movers were done in under 3 hours. Nathan was not home. I had told him the date, but not the time, and he had apparently decided that gave him sufficient cover to take Heather and the girls to her parents' place in Oakville for the weekend. I don't know whether that was cowardice or mercy. Maybe both. Heather had not spoken to me since the night I overheard her in the kitchen. I locked the spare room door, left the key on the kitchen counter. I had brought a small plant, a pothos, nearly indestructible, that I'd kept in the window for 2 years, and I almost left it. Then I took it. It was mine. I walked out to the moving truck and I did not look back at the house. This is the part of the story where, if it were a movie, there would be a montage. The new apartment, sun coming through the south-facing windows, learning which coffee shop was best for a Tuesday morning, starting to sleep through the night again, finishing my radiation treatments in April. No evidence of disease, the oncologist said, and shook my hand, and I cried in the parking lot in a way I hadn't let myself cry in months. Carol flew out in May. We put together a small bookshelf from IKEA and ordered butter chicken from the place on Richmond and sat on my balcony until it was dark. She told me I looked better than I had in 2 years. I told her she was biased. She said yes, and Nathan called for the first time in late April. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 3 days later and I picked up. He said he'd heard from the property manager of the St. Vital house. I had sold it in March, which he hadn't known, and he wanted to know if everything was all right. I said everything was fine. He was quiet for a moment, then he asked if we could get together. I said I'd think about it. I wasn't being cold, I was being honest. I genuinely needed to think about it. What happened next I didn't expect, and I want to be honest about that. In May, my financial advisor called to tell me that some of the investments Thomas had set up were due for a review, and when we went through everything together, I realized that what I had was not a fortune, no, but a kind of freedom I hadn't fully understood I possessed. The kind where you don't need anything from anyone. The kind where you can say no and mean it. I had always been careful with money. Thomas had been more careful with beneath us. Over 30 years we had been very careful indeed. In June, Nathan called again. His voice was different this time, less composed, rougher around the edges. He said things had been difficult. He said he and Heather had been fighting. He said some things had come to light about their finances that had been, he paused, more complicated than he'd led me to believe. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I had heard enough from Carol, who had heard from her daughter, who had heard things through channels I didn't need to trace. He asked if he could come see me. I said yes. I said come for lunch on a Sunday. And I made roast chicken because that's what I made when he was small and had a bad week. And he sat at my table in my apartment on my balcony, and he looked young in a way he hadn't looked in a long time. Smaller somehow. He apologized. Not adequately. I don't think he knew how to do it adequately, but he tried, and trying counts for something. He said he should have stood up for me. He said he'd been afraid of Heather, which was not an excuse, he knew that. He said he was sorry about the way things had gone. I listened. I didn't cry. I didn't tell him about the will. That conversation is still happening in a way. Nathan and I have lunch every few weeks. He's in couples counseling now. I don't ask about Heather, and he doesn't volunteer much. I see the girls on Sundays sometimes, and Mara draws me pictures that I put on the fridge with little Canadian flag magnets. Carol brought me as a joke. Heather has not called. I didn't expect her to. My niece came to visit in August, and we walked along the river for 2 hours in the early morning when the light was still low and golden, and she told me about a project she was working on, something to do with wetlands preservation in the north. And I thought about how much she sounded like the person I'd wanted to be when I was her age, before I learned to make myself smaller to fit the spaces other people left for me. I am not small anymore. I finish my annual checkup in November, and my doctor uses words like stable and encouraging, and I take them both carefully, and I carry them with me. I have a new GP who knows my full history, and a physiotherapist I see every other week, and a Tai Chi class on Wednesday mornings at the community center down the block, where nobody knows I was ever sick or lonely, or standing in someone else's hallway at 11 o'clock at night, pressing my hand against the wall just to feel something solid. I know who I am. I knew it that night in the dark when I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop instead of crying. I had given my whole life to being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's teacher, someone's tenant in a spare room that smelled faintly of dry erase marker. I had been grateful for scraps of space and careful not to take up too much. And when they finally asked me to leave, they thought they were taking something from me. They weren't. They handed me back something I had forgotten I owned. This balcony faces south. In the afternoons, when the sun comes through, I sit out here with my tea and I can see the river if I lean slightly to the left. The pothos is enormous now. It has taken over the railing completely, which my neighbors find alarming and which I find very satisfying. I don't need anyone to tell me I made the right choices. I know what I did and why I did it, and I know what I chose not to do, and I can live with all of it. That, at 67, after everything, is the sweetest thing I have ever had. There's a pothos plant on my balcony right now that has completely taken over the railing. My neighbors think it's too much. I think it's exactly right. I didn't plan for any of this to turn out the way it did. I didn't move into my son's house with a strategy. I moved in because I was grieving and tired, and I thought family meant safety. That's not naivety, that's just what you believe when you've spent a lifetime trying to be a decent person. You assume decency comes back to you. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it takes a very long time, and it comes back in a form you didn't expect. What I know now, sitting on this balcony with my tea going cold, is that the night I stood in that hallway and heard Heather say what she said, that was the night I had a choice. I could have fallen apart. I could have gone back upstairs and waited for Nathan to fix it, which he was never going to do. Or I could decide, quietly and without drama, that I was not going to let someone else's small-heartedness determine what the rest of my life looked like. I chose the third thing, and everything that followed came from that one decision. I think about Heather sometimes, and I try to be fair. She wasn't a monster. She was a person who let fear and selfishness run the show, and she didn't have enough honesty in her to look at herself clearly. That's not something I can fix. It's not something I'm responsible for. But I also think about Nathan, who knew better and stayed quiet anyway, and I think the hardest thing I've ever done wasn't leaving that house. It was forgiving my son for that silence, while also refusing to pretend it hadn't happened. Both things had to be true at once. That's not easy to hold. What carried me through wasn't anger. Anger got me out of bed the first morning, maybe, but what actually built the new life, the apartment, the lease, the lawyer, the long phone call with Carol at midnight, that came from something quieter. It came from knowing what I was worth and being willing to act on that knowledge, even when it was inconvenient and frightening and lonely. I spent 31 years teaching children that doing the right thing is not always the easy thing, that thinking clearly when you're hurt is one of the hardest skills a person can develop, that getting up after something knocks you down is not a single moment. It's a practice, a daily choice, sometimes an hourly one. I taught those things to other people's children for 3 decades. It took being asked to leave my son's spare room for me to really live them myself. Carol's daughter came by last weekend. She's working on a wetlands project, and she wanted to show me some of the mapping data, and I sat across from her at my kitchen table and thought, this is what I was building toward, even when I didn't know it. Not revenge, not justice exactly, just the chance to be present for the people who actually see me. I got that chance because I didn't let grief make me small. I got it because I paid attention, made a plan, and trusted myself when it mattered most. The plant on the railing was nearly dead when I took it from that house. I almost left it behind. I'm glad I didn't. Some things just need the right conditions to grow.